So no chat, everyone, no chat. And Allan Woodrow is there. Are we ready? I'm going to invite him in. So he can hear you from my computer, so be quiet. Just try to log in with someone. Sit next to someone. Sit next to someone. Allan.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank
Hello,
you for
hello.
inviting me to talk to the actors today and your class. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for meeting with us. We're so excited.
Yeah, and I want to not only thank you for inviting me here, but thank all of you for the time and effort you've spent creating and learning lines to perform in this play. I wish I could be there to see it in person, but I'm excited because your teacher is going to film it and share with me a film of the performance. I can't tell you how excited I am to see it. So thank you so much for making my book come to life. And I am sure I will love it. And I'm sure you guys will be doing a great job. So thank you. So I've written a whole bunch of books, not just Class Dismissed, which of course you're all familiar with, but I've written 30 books for kids. And I have a few of them here. So my very first novel was called The Pet War, which is not about a dog and a cat fighting, as you might expect from the cover, but it's about a boy who wants to adopt a dog, and his sister wants to adopt a cat, and they have a contest. Whoever wins that contest gets to pick which animal the family adopts. I'm also written The Curse of the Were-Penguin, which I have here as well, which, if you're familiar with a werewolf, it's a gets bitten by a wolf at under the full moon, and they turn into a half wolf, half person monster. Same kind of idea. A boy gets bitten by a penguin, and he finds himself slowly turning into a half penguin, half human monster himself. There's actually 2 sequels to that book: The Revenge of the Were-Penguin, which is the second book in the series, and The Battle of the Were-Penguins, which is the third in the series. I'm also the author, as you know, of Class Dismissed. Class Dismissed is actually the first of a trilogy. So if you guys have not read the other 2, they're not trilogy. Usually a trilogy, like a story ends kind of on a cliffhanger, then the next book kind of carries it out. The first book, Class Dismissed, as you know, ends. But the second book in the series, Unschooled, takes place in the same school with a different class. Not Mrs. Bryce's class, but a different class. And there's a third book in the series, Field Trip, which takes place also in the same school, also with a different class of 5th graders. So I've written all these books, but Class Dismissed is one of my favorites. So thank you. Now, you may wonder where the idea of Class Dismissed came from, and it did not come because I had a teacher that quit in the middle of my 5th grade year. I'm sure you figured that out. But I did have substitute teachers when I was in elementary school. And I'm sure all of you have had elementary school teachers. And if you're like me, some of those substitute teachers were pretty cool. They were really good at what they did. They were really nice and friendly, and maybe they were funny. But there are some substitute teachers that I didn't like so much. Maybe they were mean. Maybe they didn't quite know the lesson plan, so they were a little confused about what to do, but for whatever reason. And I thought, what a great idea would be if a teacher left, or she was sick or whatever reason, and the class had a really bad substitute teacher. And it was so bad, maybe like a drill sergeant. She made really bossed everyone around. And then she didn't last. And another substitute teacher came in, and that one was worse. And another one came in, and that one was lazy and slept the whole time. And then one didn't show up at all. And the teacher had no teacher for a day. And I was writing that idea. It wasn't great. I didn't love the book, but I did love the idea of a teacher not even showing up. So that was the start of I started, hey, I'm going to write an entire book just based on a teacher not showing up. And that became Class Dismissed. And one of the things that I really, to me, was exciting and intriguing about the idea was not just the idea of a teacher not showing up, but the fact that different kids in the class would react differently. There might be some kids like Maggie who really like school, and they're kind of bummed. No teacher is going to be there. How are they going to learn? How are they going to get into college down the line eventually? Other kids who would be maybe not into schoolwork, kind of like Kyle, they would be excited. Yeah, we can party all the time. Let's not tell anyone and have a do whatever we want all day. So that idea of not just having a teacher not show up, but how different kids would react is what made me excited to write the book, and why the book is told by different perspectives of different characters. You have a chapter from Kyle, you have a chapter from Maggie, and you have a chapter from Eric, etc. So that was what made, to me, as the writer of the book, what made the book so interesting was how these different kids would react to not having a teacher. Now, I showed you a few of my books. I have write entire life. In fact, a lot of times,
Can you write it down?
what
I
people
can't hear
want to
you.
do when they're in elementary school
What's the
isn't what they
problem?
eventually do for a living. Maybe they want to become a great athlete, but it's not
Okay.
as great of an athlete as they want to be.
Okay.
But I wanted to be a writer ever since third grade, because in third grade, I had a project in school to write a book. And it wasn't a book like Class Dismissed. It was a construction paper cover. I was assigned the book with another kid in class. His name was Hank. So Hank and I were assigned this book together.
Just hear
In fact, I have it right here. I've kept this book all these years. It's called The Big Book of Cheese by Allan Woodrow and Hank Birch. My very first book. It's just a few pictures that I drew. And some chapters that I wrote. And if I shared that book with you, what you would notice is I was really bad. I could not write. I could not draw. You would look at this book and you would think, how is this person ever going to grow up to be an author someday when they can barely write anything in third grade? But I also knew that I loved writing this book. I also knew I was bad. And I'm sure you guys all know that when you're not good at something, but you love to do it, whether it's sports, or maybe you like playing a musical instrument, maybe you like to dance, maybe you're in a ballet class or a hip hop dance class. Well, to get better, you have to practice, right? Well, that's what I knew I had to do. I knew I had to practice all the time. And if you practice, you don't just show up, for example, if you're playing soccer, you don't just show up at the soccer game on the weekend. You have to go to the practices during the week. That's how you learn how to play soccer. And if you love to play the piano, okay, to show up at the piano recital end of the year, or the ballet recital at the end of the year, you have to go to your classes. You have to learn how to play the notes of the piano. You have to learn how to do the dances in the ballet. It's the same thing with writing. I had to practice and learn how to write, learn how to spell, and learn how grammar worked, and learn everything about writing, so that eventually I could live my dream that I had since third grade to be a writer. So I practiced writing all the way through elementary schools. I didn't just write my cheese book. I wrote all kinds of books with me and my friends. I had a friend who was a really good artist, so he would draw for me and I would write the words. And I continued to write through middle school. I used to love comic books, so I used to make my own comics in middle school. And then in high school, I continued to write, even as an adult. I continued to write, and eventually, by writing all those years, by practicing all those years, I became a pretty good writer. So no matter what you guys want to do, maybe you want to be a writer yourself some days, or maybe you want to be a great actor. Obviously, you're all really talented, whether it's on the stage or making sets or whatever you want to do. If you continue to practice acting, or continue making sets and art, or you continue to practice writing, eventually, maybe if you aren't great at it now, eventually you will become really good. So that's my big advice. No matter what you love to do, make sure you practice. Now, as a writer, to become a great writer, it's not just about practicing writing. Another thing that writers do, and I love to do, is we also read a lot. Now, no matter what you like to do, let's say if you want to be a great athlete, you don't just practice all the time. Even as an adult, professional basketball players, professional baseball players, they still practice all the time. But also, they watch. Basketball players watch basketball. Baseball players watch baseball. And by watching other athletes do amazing things, you get inspired to try to do those things yourself. You learn tricks and how to dribble or how to take shots, and you incorporate that into your own game. If you love to dance, you probably like to watch dancers. You get inspired by watching great dancers. If you like music, you probably listen to music. And you get inspired by hearing great notes and wonder how that person sings so well, how that person plays instruments so well. I want to try to do that myself. Well, that's the same thing with writers. We read all the time. A lot of times when I read for enjoyment because it's fun, but also I get tips and tricks. I learn, wow, that book really scared me. How did the author make me so scared? What did they do in the story? How do they tell the story to make me scared? How do they make me laugh? Oh, wow, that book is so good. I wish that I could write a book as good as that. In fact, that's why I first started writing children's books. I was reading children's books with my daughters. I didn't think I was going to be a children's book author, but I was reading, when they were in elementary school, I was reading the books with them. I was reading alongside them, sometimes read to them at nighttime, and I just loved and fell in love with those books. But if I hadn't been reading children's books, I never would have been inspired and excited to write children's books myself. So not only do you have to practice, but read, watch, do things, immerse yourself into what you love to do, and eventually not only become better at what you do, maybe like me, you'll become so good that you'll become a professional author or a professional musician or even a doctor or math. You can't just pick up a math book and start doing math. You have to listen to your teacher. You have to do your homework. And by doing that and practicing, eventually, when you grow up, you'll get better and better and better. And even if you're not great now, eventually you will be. So I want to make sure we do have time for questions. I do have a hard stop, by the way, at 10:30. But I'd asked your teacher if maybe she could grab some of the questions you guys had, and I would love to take some time to answer them.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I have some questions for you from all of our students. There's 4 classes of 5th grade. I'm just gonna grab random questions. So for example, I have one question. Who was the hardest character to develop in class dismissed?
Each of the characters had a small part of me in them. Of the 4-5 main kid characters, I would say Eric was the easiest to write because he was the most like me. When I was a kid, I obviously liked to write, as I mentioned, like Eric does. But I was also kind of quiet. I was not the kind of kid who would raise my hand a lot. I was always sat in the back and was fairly shy and quiet in class. And Eric is like that too. The people who were most unlike me as kids were Samantha. We were not rich growing up. We weren't poor, but we certainly didn't have money like she did. And Kyle was, at least in the beginning, is kind of a bully, and I wasn't a bully. I knew bullies, so I was able to write those characters. I knew people who were bullies. I knew people who had a lot of money, and I based some of what I was writing on them. Because those personalities aren't my personality, those type of characters were a little harder to write than other personalities were.
Okay, I have another one. Out of all the conflicts or funny moments, which one was your favorite to write in class dismissed?
Hold on, I'm just going to change the setting here in my computer. One moment, please. Sorry about that.
Really? Welcome.
Okay, thank you. So when I was a kid, I didn't just like to write. Of course, I like to write different kind of things. I loved writing parody songs, where especially around the holiday time, I'd take Christmas carols and I'd change the lyrics, make them funny, and around it I would rewrite the same carols at Halloween time, make them Halloweeny, and all the song I really liked on the radio, I'd rewrite that song to make it funny. So one of the things that I really enjoyed doing is writing the play. At the end, in fact, when your teacher told me you were performing a play, the first thing I thought of was you were performing the play in the book. It wasn't until after she shared the script with me that I realized that you were just doing the entire book and not just that end scene. But writing song parodies was something I loved doing when I was 8, 9, 10 years old. And now getting a chance to do it as an adult for a book was a lot of fun and my favorite part of writing the book. So definitely the play, the American Revolution play at the end.
Okay, so I'm going to combine 2 questions here. Was being an author your first career choice? Or also, how old were you when you said, I'm a writer, so this is what I want to do?
So that's a great question. So as I mentioned to you already, when I was in third grade, I decided I wanted to be an author. In fact, there was a newsletter we passed out in third grade where all the kids had to say what they wanted to be when they grew up. And that newsletter went to their parents. So I still have that newsletter. And all the girls, this was back in the day, all the girls wanted to be teachers or nurses, and a lot of the boys wanted to be doctors or professional football players. And some people wanted to be what their father did. One person's dad was a farmer, he wanted to be a farmer. Some people whose parents were doctors wanted to be doctors. But I said I wanted to be a writer. So that was all I've ever wanted to do my whole life. But I also knew that I was really bad in third grade. So even though I was practicing, I still felt I wasn't good enough. And even when I graduated college and as an adult, I thought to myself, man, it is really hard to be an author. There are millions of people who are writing books, and most of them never get published. Most of them write for decades and never find success. Who's going to want to read a book by me? So I was convinced that even though that's what I wanted to do, I wasn't good enough. And so I didn't even try writing a book for many years. I got a job in advertising as a writer. So I knew I wanted to write. So for many years before writing books, I was writing television commercials and radio commercials and ads that are in magazines and websites and all kinds of things like that. Thinking that, boy, I really want to write a book. That's what I want to do. But I told myself, don't do it, Allan. You're going to fail, and you don't want to fail. And so eventually, when my kids were in elementary school, and I mentioned I was reading the books that they were reading and falling in love with them, and decided, you know what, I got to try. Finally, I have been telling myself I'm not good enough for so many years. I got to finally try. And when I did, because I was a professional writer writing TV commercials, and because I've been practicing writing for so many years, I was a pretty good writer. And so I was able to get a book published actually very quickly. My very first book I wrote got published, and after only a few months. So I was very fortunate that way. But sometimes it's hard when you love to do something. It's hard to challenge yourself to do it because you feel, boy, if I fail something I really love, then what happens next? So I've only wanted to be a writer. I have been a writer only my whole career, but I wasn't just writing books for a while. I was writing other things.
Okay, so many of my students were asking if you were planning on making a second class dismiss, and you mentioned that unschooled is like let's say the part 2, and then
Yes.
but with
So
different characters.
class dismissed, and class dismissed kind of ends. I mean, Mrs. Bryce, there's not really somewhere to go next. Okay. A teacher's not going to quit the next year, right? So that would be silly. But we wanted to continue the story and to continue in Liberty Falls Elementary School is where it takes place. So how do we continue stories with the same kind of kids? So the next book, which was called Unschooled, which I shared with you, takes place in the same school. And some of the same kids have small parts in it. Like you'll see Maggie or Kyle say hi to someone in the hall. But that's about it. Otherwise, it's a totally different class with a totally different plot, but it takes place in the same school. And the third book, Field Trip, also totally different class. Some of the people play small little roles in it. You'll see those characters reappear, but the plot is very different. But I don't have any plans to continue telling stories in that school. And I certainly don't have any more plans to tell stories with Kyle and Maggie and everyone. I think I told that story.
Okay, we're so excited to keep reading then. Another question here: how long did it take you to write one book? I mean, how long does it take you to write one full book?
So it varies on a book. It took me about 8-9 months to write Unschooled. To write Class Dismissed, and around the same amount of time for the next 2 books in the series. I would say 8 months is pretty much my average, but some books take much longer. So I mentioned my Curse of the Were-Penguin book. That took 5 years to write. Mm-hmm. Now, I didn't just write that straight for 5 years. I wrote that book, then I put it away, then I wrote Class Dismissed, then I wrote some more of it, then I put it away, then I wrote Unschooled, then I put it away, and I wrote on and off for 5 years for Curse of the Were Penguin, but that is by far the exception to the rule. Most of my books take around 8 months, and that includes revisions. So a writer doesn't just write a book and they're done with it. We go back and revise that book over and over and over again. In fact, I probably rewrote that book 25 times before I was happy with it. And any book that you see in a bookstore isn't just writers sitting down, writing a book and sending it off. They write the book, it might take them a few months. Then they read it again and make changes. Boy, I don't like that character. I don't like that scene. Boy, I made these horrible spelling mistakes. We make the same mistakes that you guys make. And I guarantee you, the next time you get a project in school that your teacher gives you something to write, if you just write it once, it might be okay. But if you just take the time to revise it and read it through it again and make all your find all your mistakes and corrections and maybe find some ways to re-say some things, maybe add some different information to it, you'll be amazed how much better your writing will be. So anything you see that has gone through multiple revisions, but not just practicing and reading, but revising is the third key component to writing well. So I would suggest all of you who want to be good writers or just have a really good class essay or something in school, just take the time to revise it at least once, if not twice, and you'll be surprised how much better your writing will be.
Okay. This is a very curious question. We know your book has a multicultural atmosphere, and there's students from everywhere. That's what we got. We know Maggie, she's very smart, she's African American, we learned that. But we have a question about Adam, and we were wondering if Adam was from Asian origin. It's just curiosity.
He is, yes.
Oh, you see, you were right.
So it's important. Not only, as I mentioned, that what made me interested in telling the story was how different kids would deal with it. Right, Maggie being kind of depressed that her teacher, no more teacher, versus Kyle, party all the time. So it's not just the personalities of the kids. I wanted to make sure that they were well represented. So there was equal boys and girls. There were people of different nationalities, ethnicities, or people of different backgrounds. So, I have a chart that I made where everyone sits in the class, little bios about their favorite color and their favorite animal, all kinds of things. Most of that never made the book, but I knew each kid in that classroom. And both my daughters both had their names as kids. And other kids are named after various people in my neighborhood. I have a nephew, Kyle.
Oh, okay.
So he's nothing like the character. I mean, none of these characters are anything like people whose name I stole to use them. But you have to name 25 kids in a class, and that's part of the fun of being a writer. You can make anything up you want. You can use people's names that you know, and you can not use people's names that you know. So a lot of the names are made up, but some names are actually real people. That at least the names themselves are from real people, but not necessarily their personalities.
Okay. And probably, I don't know, this is the last question. What does a regular day as a writer looks like? Like, what do you do? How much time do you spend writing or promoting your books? Like, what do you do in your day?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a typical day. So when you guys eventually, many, many years from now, go to middle school and high school, and you graduate and get a job. Some jobs you go to an office every day, right? You even at least before the pandemic, it was more common than now, but you go to an office every day and you sit in the office. Or if you work at a clothing store, you have to go and you sell clothing to people. If you're a doctor, you go to your doctor's office. If you're a fireman, you go to a fire station every day, and then you, of course, go to various places to put out fires. Or if you're an electrician or a plumber, you go make house calls all the time. Well, as a writer, most of my days are spent right here. This is my office where I do almost all my writing. Sometimes I go to a coffee shop if I get bored here, but usually most of my days I sit right in the seat I'm sitting at now. I'm looking at my computer, so I write on my computer all day long, unless I'm talking to a class. So I do, travel around and visiting classrooms, not always via the computer, but in person. But otherwise, if I'm not meeting a group of students or maybe visiting a bookstore, most of my time is sitting here. And so because I don't have anyone telling me to sit, I don't have a boss. I don't have to sign in the morning saying, hey, I'm working. I can choose to sleep in and not work if I want. But the problem is that my books don't get written. If no one's telling me to work, then I don't work. Well, then I'm not writing any books. So one of the challenges, one of the great things about being the writer is I can just be here in my office. I don't have to leave the house, which is very easy. But it's also sometimes lonely. And you kind of want someone to tell you, hey, Allan, get to work today. You want to be the teacher who all the kids are looking forward to seeing you today. If you had no kids every day to school to see you, how unexciting would that be as a teacher? Maybe you're doing Zoom due to the pandemic. I don't know. So you got a taste of that. But so I have to force myself to sit in my office every day. It's totally up to me whether I do or not. But if I don't, my work doesn't get done. So I try to be here every day working 7 days a week. I don't even try to, even like for an hour on a Saturday or a Sunday, I try to do a little writing. I feel like if I haven't done anything all day, that I feel kind of like, well, I missed today. I should have done something. So I pretty much write every day, but most of my days are here in this office, which is, as a writer is somewhat necessary, but also very different from other jobs where you go somewhere or have to be somewhere or have a boss telling you where to be every day.
Okay. The stories you wrote in third grade or fifth grade, do you remember what they were about?
I have some of them. I showed you the cheese book, and just to give you an idea about the quality of drawing and writing I have. I don't know if you can see this. This is a picture of the big cheese. The big cheese was a walking, talking piece of cheese, and this is Allan Woodrow drawing the big cheese. Oh. And my drawings in third grade were that bad, and my writing wasn't any better. But in fourth and fifth grade, I have my folder of various things that I've written. When I was in fourth and fifth grade, I loved monsters. I especially loved Godzilla. I don't know if any Godzilla fans there, but I wrote a bunch of Godzilla books. As I mentioned, my best friend was a really good artist. He drew monsters really well, and I still can't draw it today. Mm-hmm. So I have more books. They're construction paper cover with pictures inside and everything, and a lot of them based on monsters. I have comic books that I wrote. I actually sold comic books. I sold them for a penny. So I don't have them anymore. They were awful because I couldn't draw. But a neighbor would feel bad for me and give me a penny for a comic book when I was in fifth grade, fourth grade. But I continued to write. I was in high school. In middle school, there was a literary magazine newspaper, and I wrote for that. In high school, I did the same. And I have some copies of those as well. So I do have a lot of copies of my things, but not everything, of course. But I'm fortunate that my mom kept a lot of those things in a box in the basement. So later on, I was able to uncover some of those things.
Oh, that's nice. Okay. Do we have time for another one? Another question?
One more, we'll say, because we started a minute or two late, and I need to get going.
Okay. So, I'm going to combine two here. You identify the most with Eric. Is he your favorite character? And do you agree with us that Kyle is the main character?
Eric is not my favorite character.
Eric is not your favorite character.
Kyle's my favorite character.
Kyle is your favorite character. Okay.
I tried to make each character, except for Adam, as a small part, I tried to give them equal, the same number of chapters. Mm-hmm. I didn't want there to be one main character. Now, the very first chapter was from Kyle. Mm-hmm. So that gives the impression, I think, that Kyle is the main character. And I think his, what they call a story arc, where you start and where you end, is the most dramatic. He starts very irresponsible. He can't even look over after his little brother who escapes from the house. He grows a lot. Right? He learns to not be a bully. He learns to be responsible. So his mom feels comfortable leaving him alone with the kids. I don't think the other characters have as big of a personality change. So Kyle probably appears that way, but that wasn't the intent going in. The intent was to pick 4 or 5 different kid types that would react differently to the teacher quitting and make them equal stars in the book. So while I had the most fun writing the Kyle chapters, I don't think of him as being the main chapter, the main character.
Okay. Well, we all want to thank you. Can we say thank you? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So
Thank you. Thank you. Wash, 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 wash.
Thank you all. I'm looking forward to watching the play. So good luck later this week putting it on. I'm sure it'll be great. And again, thank you in advance for sending it to me because I'm excited to watch it. Share it with my family. So I've been telling everyone about it. They're all excited to watch it.
We're all nervous but excited. So wish us luck. Thank you so much.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.